Good evening, everyone. Frankly, that's Senator Lovely's dialogue there is quite hard to follow. I don't know where that lady gets a chance to even breathe, but she's a busy individual, and I give her a lot of credit and thank you for all the work she does. It's amazing. I want to thank everybody here in the SalemDems for having me. I know we tried to schedule this a couple of times, so I appreciate your patience. So, as you know, my name is Kevin Coppinger. I am the sheriff here in Essex County. I've been your sheriff for the last little over 5.5 years. Prior to that, I was a police officer in the city of Lynn. I came up through the ranks, up to the rank of sheriff. Let me back up. Chief of police for 7 years. And then when my predecessor, Sheriff Frank Cousins, decided to retire in 2016, I threw my hat in the ring. And I was lucky to be elected by the voters, and I took office in early 2017. I tell you that because, 32 years as a police officer in the city of Lynn, and I love the city of Lynn. I still reside there. But I've saw a lot. I've learned a lot. I experienced a lot. I have a great knowledge of the criminal justice system in addition to the law enforcement field. And being a cop all those years, especially as I got a little older and a little more experience and with rank, I've said to myself, there's got to be a better way. There has to be a better way. We kept arresting the same people. They'd come back to the community. They would act out for a number of reasons. Police officers would respond to those 911 calls, make an arrest, bring the individual to court. Same people in court all the time, to a point where, honestly, the judges didn't know what to do with the individuals, and they'd ship them to jail. And the individuals do their time, then they come back to Lynn again. And it was just that constant, recidivism, that cycle that just never ends. So I wanted to do something different, and I had some ideas. So I threw my hat in the ring, as I said, and then I hit the ground running in early 2017. First of all, putting together what I believe is an excellent staff of administrators and mid-management mid-level managers, and the correctional officers themselves, the gentlemen and ladies that really do the yeoman's work for us in our housing units, our top shelf. But my goal was to raise the bar in corrections. I wanted the Essex County to be one of the best. So we started doing that with, first of all, increasing the accountability of our officers and increased training at all levels. And I did that by adding extra hours in our annual in-service training curriculum, bringing in expert speakers from around not only the region, but around the nation, and brought that level of training all the way up from all the different ranks, all the way up to the level of sheriff. And I should pause for a minute just to explain, because I don't think a lot of people understand the actual role of the sheriff and the size of the agency. So the Essex County Sheriff's Department we have 600 employees, another 200 vendors of volunteers. Our inmate count as of today is 1,157. And we have thousands of visitors who come into the jail each and every year to visit the inmates. We operate on a budget of $82 million. And we serve 34 cities and towns here in Essex County by supporting the court system, so state and local law enforcement, and individual cities and towns based on need. And I tell you all that because I really want you to understand the depth of what we do. And when I talk about the inmate population, we are the second largest in the Commonwealth, not only next to Suffolk County, which is the city of Boston mainly. And even between us and Suffolk, it's probably maybe 50, maybe 60 inmate difference. But because we are a jail and house of correction, we house pretrial as well as sentenced individuals. And amongst those pretrial, we have folks that are accused of murder, rape of a child with force, armed robbery, home invasion, drug traffickers, all the heavy, what the FBI calls Part 1 crimes. And then there's a lot of other individuals in the middle, and then down to what we call the lower risk crimes, individuals charged with the specific crimes. For example, simple drug possession, maybe some domestic violence charges, which aren't always low risk, but I'm going very light on that. But disorderly conduct, maybe a second or third or driving under the influence offense, and a whole other similar range of offenses like that, where really we deem the individuals to be low risk, as do the courts. But please keep in mind, the people in the jail are sent to us from the courts by the judges and or a jury, but they're usually sentenced by a judge because they're deemed to be a threat to public safety. And that's really the nature of what we do. We want to improve public safety in Essex County, as well as the Commonwealth. We're going to concentrate on our own county here. So those individuals that were in the jail, our goal is, where appropriate, is to provide services, find out what's wrong, what started the issues with these individuals, and how can we provide a range of treatments to get them out of our jails, if applicable, and back to their communities in better shape than when they arrived. Our motto is reentry starts day one. And I'm going to go through it quickly because I don't want to take up too much time. But when somebody comes into our intake on day one, we do an assessment. Same way as you might go to the doctor on an annual basis for a physical. We look at the individual. Okay, why are you here? What are you charged with? What is your history? Do you have a substance use disorder? Do you have a mental illness? Are there other issues that you may have to deal with? Are you educated? Do you have a job? Do you have a family that's still engaged with you? And we go through, are there any health issues? So we put together an individualized treatment plan. And then we have to classify them, which is really part of the law enforcement job of the occupation of the sheriff, because you have to know how to keep people away from each other, because it is a jail and a house of correction. We do have people that can be very violent at any moment. So we got to make sure we don't put, for example, rival gang members in the same housing unit, or individuals who have a history between themselves, because you don't want any violence inside the jail. So once we do that, then we roll up our sleeves and say, okay, now that they're here, and I'm going to say this tongue in cheek because we have now a captive audience, what are we going to offer these individuals on a voluntary basis, because we can't force them to do it, so we can help them, improve themselves. And again, upon release, upon reentry, they don't come back and see us. So we start with substance use disorder. The opiate epidemic, we all know it's been raging now for many, many years. People are dying in our streets, and that continues today. So at the the Sheriff's Department, we have a number of programs, starting with what we call our Clean and Sober Existence Unit, where folks want to come in and pretty much go cold turkey and get completely off drugs. It's part of a pretrial unit. We work very closely with the drug courts in the Commonwealth, including the DA's office and defense counsel and probation and the local police. And the individuals come in there voluntarily, participate in the 28-day program, leave there sober with the treatment plan, go back in front of the judge, and maybe the judge will opt to send them home. Maybe they put them on an electronic bracelet or some other provision of security or safety that the judge deems is necessary. If an individual wants to stay on medication-assisted treatment, which is fairly new, it came out around 2018 when criminal justice reform was passed by the legislature. We can put them on different levels of medication-assisted treatment to help them maintain their addiction, but at an appropriate level. We embrace this when it happens, and we have now opened up. We put some money together. We opened it up, and we built out a dispensary in our Middleton jail, which is one of the first in the country because it's very unique. Because medication-assisted treatment is methadone, Suboxone, Subutex, drugs that have been the principles of contraband for years trying to get in the jail, and now we're giving it to them. Hadn't been anywhere in the country before. And you might know, I'm not going to deny it, I was sued by the ACLU, and I will give the ACLU credit. They picked 3 sheriff's departments across the country, one in Washington State, one in the state of Maine, and one in Essex County with my name on it. Came up very fast, quick. We didn't even really have a chance to see what it was. We did appear in the U.S. District Court, and the judge ordered us to give an individual by the name of Jeffrey Pesci his medication, which was Suboxone. Okay, no problem. We did it. We then said, we got to do a better job. We embraced it. Then we built out this dispensary. We got our research. We work with the DEA because a dispensary had never been built in a correctional facility. We now have a national model where people come from across the country to either call us or come see how we operate with the medication-assisted treatment dispensary that we have. And we average about 175 individuals on any given day where we're giving out dispensing the medications to them. Let's move over to mental illness for a second. That affects about half of our population, which is a lot of individuals. And one thing about COVID-19, I'm going to say, at least in my opinion, is it kind of brought to light the issues of mental illness with a lot of folks, particularly those in the jail. So we have established units in our jail to help the individuals do that. We have over 30 licensed clinical social workers on staff to help address these needs. We wanted to bring it to another level. I hired a director of clinical services, a woman with 27 years of experience in that field, who is an expert, and especially in correctional healthcare in the area of mental illness. One of the things we did, I'm very proud of, about 2.5 years ago, maybe just before COVID, maybe a little longer, we opened up another unit where we took individuals who traditionally would be in an 8x10 concrete cell, something you might see on TV, took them out of there and put them in what we call our COPE unit, Correctional Opportunities for Personal Enrichment. That's a dormitory style housing unit where now that individuals in there with about 35 other inmates with the same similar illness. And then we hired extra clinical social workers and embedded them in the unit during the normal workday. This provided pretty much treatment on demand. So the inmates could get up and go see the clinicians whenever they want. But we also, promoted social skills. So now if they buddy up with somebody else in the unit, instead of going to the clinician, maybe they just want to go sit in somebody else's bunk or sit in part of where the chairs are for social time and just kind of talk about their day and maybe vent like a lot of us might do with our spouse when we get home from the end of the day. This has been very successful. We've seen a reduction in inmate acting out, which is good for the officers and me, because our officers are not going hands-on, as we call it, when the officers have to restrain somebody. But because of the techniques we're coming up with this mental illness and the treatment by our clinical social workers, we've seen some really good progress in their healthcare and in their whole behavior. We've taken it to the next step now. We've opened up a similar unit with a little bit more serious incidents of mental illness. A little bit harder for us, but that's working now, but we're giving it a shot. Now let's move over to programs for a second. Everything we do in the jail, as I said before, is focused on reentry. We have over 100 different programs where we can tailor make to the individual inmate. Let's start with education. A lot of the inmates don't even have their high school degree. We brought in Northern Essex Community College, as well as Merrimack College, brought them into the institution where their instructors now come in and work with the inmates. Many times, like 3 times a year, we have a graduation for high set. That's a new high school equivalency if you're not familiar with it. We also offer college level courses by those institutions. And if the inmates don't finish up before they get released, one option is they can go to those schools and they can roll right in the schools and transfer their credits. We also have vocational training, which is huge because the sheriff's office being so multidimensional. Let's teach these guys and ladies a trade so they can probably get a better chance of getting a job upon release. Some of the vocational training we train them in ServSafe to work in the restaurant industry, OSHA to work in the construction industry. We teach them a course called CTEC, which is fiber optic cabling, Cat5, Cat6 cabling in the construction industry with technology. And the flagship of our vocational training is our hardscape program that we operate at our pre-release center up in Lawrence at the farm, working with the New England Concrete Manufacturers Association and an instructor from Essex North Shore Technical High School next door to our Middleton campus. We teach the inmates masonry walkways and patios and walls to help beautify property. Inmates love it. Most of them are young men, so they're working out. They're outside. When they get released, the landscape companies are out there trying to hire them. Give them another chance. Give them an opportunity. Give them a skill so they don't recidivate. We also have a number of clinical programs to address all those issues I meant before, but even stuff you might not think about. We do creative writing classes for the inmates. For the women, we started a new program on computer programming. So it's like computer programming 101 that some of the women have engaged in being taught by outside instructors. Then we have classes where we actually teach, the women how to be a mom, and similarly to the men how to be a dad. A little bit heart-wrenching, but it's very much needed because some of these individuals don't know how to be a parent. And we also have, resume writing. We have how to interview for a job. And about 6 or 7 weeks ago, we actually had a job fair inside the Middleton jail in our library. We brought a dozen companies to come in. They set up their little tables, and we had the inmates come in and go around and interview possible jobs post-incarceration. Very successful. The employers, first of all, were very impressed with what they have in front of them as possible candidates. And we're very hopeful that a lot of those candidates will get a job upon release. So I tell you all this because let's talk about reentry now. And this is really what drove me to run for sheriff when I talked about my days in Lynn and that I could see something there had to be a better way. Reentry is key. And when I saw that we did open up 2 centers, one in Lawrence and one in Lynn. It's our STAR program, supporting transition and reentry. These 2 cities are the main feeders for the jail. That's why they're there. And someday I'd love to expand upon it. But right now we have the STAR program. So individuals coming out of our jail, maybe the judge will allow them to get out early, but they can report to the STAR program. They can continue the majority of those programs I mentioned that we do in-house. They can do it in the STAR program while they're released, while they're hopefully re-engaged with families, while they're back working in their normal employment, and while they're living in our cities and towns and staying out of trouble. In addition to that, when I proposed this 3 years ago, I actually went around and spoke to several of the judges to get their input. And one of the good things about STAR is a lot of times a judge will be sitting on the bench and have somebody in front of them that committed a crime and he has to sentence them. And sometimes they say, do I sentence them to jail or is there another alternative? Now the judge can sentence them to the STAR program and put specific guidelines in there. Maybe they go two nights a week or 3 days a week, whatever it is. We are open days and evenings. And that way we run it for them. We bring in again, Northern Essex Community College. Merrimack does not go down there, to be honest with you, but then we also bring Spectrum Clinical Services, who helps a lot with the clinical services that the individuals need. And we've seen great success. It's also taken another step in Lynn, where the Lynn police have a bicycle unit that works the downtown area. They came to us with an idea saying, listen, we have folks on the street we know are going to get in trouble. Can we just talk to them and see if they can come to your STAR program and get those services before they get involved in the criminal justice system, before somebody dials 911? We're like, absolutely and truly, bring them in. This is a free service. There's no charge for these individuals. They come in and we give them the assistance they need. We see great progress in there. You've heard about recidivism rates. There's been a lot of talk about that lately. I always warn folks when you're talking about recidivism rates, there are so many definitions to recidivism rates. I don't have a lot of faith in them because unless you're comparing apples to apples, it's a different animal. I will talk about our recidivism rates because I compare the Essex County for what we've done in prior years. So our recidivism rate, it shows what we are doing is working. We've had a 5% reduction in the last year because of these programs, and we monitor the inmates and we watch what they do and how they succeed after they leave us. We've dropped 5%. We had a rate of 47%, it's down to 42. The way we define recidivism, that is a good number. But even better than that, if somebody stays with us and proceeds through what we call the step down program, where they go up to our Lawrence pre-release center and engage in more program in work release programs, that rate drops to just over 31%. And for the women, it drops to 18. Those are very, very good numbers. It shows what we are doing, and it's really, really starting to work very nicely. And we're looking forward to more progress down the road. Before I close, I just want to say just one thing. Everybody knows I have an opponent, and this is a tough race, and there's a lot of good ideas out there. I respect my opponents, compassion and desire to see more of the human services part of the sheriff's department. I agree with that. I've embraced that since I got there. I embraced that during my days as chief of police in Lynn. But that is only one dimension of what we do at the sheriff's department and in the role of the sheriff. I mentioned the administrative duties I have. $82 million budget, 800 employees or staff that are working every day, 1,100 and over 1,100 inmates. That's a huge responsibility, number one, to make sure everybody's safe and secure every day and that things run smoothly in there. Based on my experience from Lynn, working with the courts, understanding the law, understanding probation, parole, and the needs of the community through community involvement and community meetings. That's huge to do. You have to have safety and security in the jail. You have to have a criminal justice background, as I said before, with classification, knowing the inmates, knowing criminal behavior. My days in Lynn taught me what the root causes of crime are and how to address those in the best way to make sure our 34 cities and towns are safer than they have been, and we continue to strive to do that. So in closing, I would gladly take some questions if we have to. If we have some, I will finish up and let Attorney O'Shea have his time. But before closing, I just want to say again, my name is Kevin Coppinger. I am your sheriff. I would love to do a second term, and I'm respectfully asking for your vote on September 6th. And thank you very much for the time you've allowed me here today.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I think we have time for maybe like one question. If anybody has a question for Sheriff Coppinger. Shay.
Yes, I'll ask very quickly. Thank you so much, Sheriff, for being here. And one of my questions was going to be, I know you mentioned added some licensed social worker, and that's really beautiful. I know your opponent talk about that also. If you had the opportunity, if you had money, it's always regarding money, would you, it's probably the same thing, would you have an office that would have some focus on people with disability, where people in the community may have a family member with mental illness, where they'll be more than happy to say, okay, I want your office to meet that person. So the community would know that I have somebody at home who is dealing with, mental illness and so on. In case if they see them on the street, people would know, oh, be careful with that person. Do not injure that person. Go a little bit more gentle. Would you something in that line? If you could, would you add something like that? An office like that on disability?
I apologize. Either we have a bad connection or what here. I didn't get the whole question. I said something, folks with mental illness and something with the families. Was I understanding that right?
Yes, yes. I know that you mentioned you have added a number of licensed social worker, which
Social
is
worker.
beautiful. Your opponent talked about that herself. So if you could have an office that will focus only on disability, because we know sometimes mental illness may cause people, a lot of people that may find themselves in jail because of that. Would you, if you could have an office that focus on disability, where family members, could call and say, I have my child that is dealing with mental illness, and at least that person is in the community. If something bad happened, at least your office is aware of that person. It's another way again to feel, to do understand that person who is going to that issue. If you could, would you work on having an office like that focus on disability? Because sometimes the disability and the mental illness and all of that could work together hands in hands, if I may say.
Well, I think I understand you now. Thank you for repeating that. Yeah,
Yes.
the answer is absolutely. And if I could just take a minute, Chris, and just explain, mental illness is such an issue in society today. I applaud people for coming out and at least acknowledging it and then, helping to share that and seeking out treatment. When I was the chief of police in Lynn, we created what we call a behavioral health unit, where we employed 3 civilian clinicians and caseworkers, and we embedded them in the police department to go out with the officers out on patrol. The reason behind that was, I've always said, any police officer with his or her assault should know everybody on their route, the folks that are good citizens, never get involved with crime, and those that commit crime. And so the theory with the behavioral health unit was a prevention mechanism. So if the officer knows somebody on the route that's having a bad day, maybe they're off their medication, or maybe they get a call from a family member once everybody knew we had this program, the officers could get the behavioral health unit and go out to the scene or go out to meet with the family, do a preventive sit down and discuss the issues and come up with some resources to how we fix it. Similarly with the jail, that's what we do with all the clinical social workers I mentioned. And then the young lady, 27 years experience, she's in my director of clinical services. She does that a lot. And this might not be directly related to your question, but her name is Jen Padre, and Jen will actually open up her door or her phone to folks who may be related to an individual in the institution with mental illness. And they call Jen all the time to discuss the issue, how their loved one is being handled, or any information we need to do to make sure we're providing the individual in our custody the better care. So if I'm answering your question right, I would love to open up an office. For community members, I would say I would have to do that with local police because they're instrumental, as I just mentioned, but also tying in community providers, treatment centers, community health centers, local social workers outside the sheriff's department. So we have a continuity of services. If we start working with somebody inside the jail and then we're going to release them back to the community, we want to make sure they have another revenue or another resource to continue their treatment. That's huge. And that's something we do through the STAR program with all the extra resources that we have found just by asking a lot of these different community resources. So absolutely and truly, I think we need to do more and more, addressing the mental health issues. We have to encourage more people to just come and seek help. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just another illness that we all have some form. And I think that would help public safety immensely across the board if we could accomplish that.